And then again, these are the pictures that are coming in from Syria. I want to get straight now to CNN's Mohammed Leela. He's live for us in Turkey. Of course, reaction pouring in now from around the world. Mohammed, you're in Istanbul tonight. What's the reaction out there?
Well, Don, you know, anytime you talk about developments in Syria, you know there's going to be a ripple effect across the region, across the Middle East. We know, for example, many countries in the Middle East, for example, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, this is the news that they have been waiting for. They have been pleading with the U.S. government for years now to take some sort of forceful and meaningful action in Syria. And this is, they're effectively now getting what they wanted. For example, Saudi Arabia this morning putting out a release saying that it fully supports the U.S. military operation against military targets. You're going to see that same sentiment over and over again from a lot of these countries. Don't forget, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, these are countries that have backed a lot of these rebel groups that are fighting against Bashar al-Assad. They've spent billions of dollars trying to oust and overthrow Bashar al-Assad. So if anything, not only will they be expressing a sigh of relief today and a sense of happiness, but they may even ask the United States to do more, because as all of the analysts have been talking about this evening, this may not fundamentally change the balance of power in Syria. We know Bashar al-Assad has other resources and other military bases. So what we might see is, for example, Turkey and Saudi Arabia coming out and calling on the Trump administration to actually do more, to do something that would fundamentally shift the balance of power. But overall in this region, the reaction today, I think, is one of perhaps a little bit of surprise, but certainly happiness and an eagerness to push the United States to do even more.
Mohammed Leela in Istanbul. Mohammed, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I want to bring in back with me now Ruler Jebreal, Michael Weiss, and Major General James Spider Marks. Also, Global Affairs Analyst David Rode, National Security Investigations Editor at Reuters. So let's get into this. A lot of things that I want to talk about here. How does one assess whether, you know, Assad has changed? If he's a changed man, do we do it because of chemical weapons, because of sarin gas, or because of barrel bombs? Like how?
He won't change. If it's really a one-off and there's no real strategy after this, he will go back to do what he did after the first time we warned him not to use chemical weapons in 2013. He will go back and use barrel bombs, starvation, mass rape, and all the other methods that basically produced both jihadists and a refugee crisis that we never seen since World War II. So if it's really a one-off and it's only a political play game, so we can not think anymore about Russia or about Bannon or about corruption or Bill O'Reilly, that will actually not deter Assad. He will continue and the war will be exasperated. What we are seeing now in Syria, something that we are seeing a dictator who has been emboldened beyond anything we've ever seen. I think we saw this with Saddam Hussein maybe when he invaded Kuwait, but we stopped him. We're seeing a guy that basically is telling his people, I will obliterate any of you if you ever stand against me, your children, grandchildren. Let's remember that in 2003, when Americans invaded Iraq, and they were in Iraq, this is the guy that was releasing jihadists to fight Americans in Iraq. Colin Powell had a meeting with him in 2005. He brought with him Rob Dineen, who works at the Council on Foreign Relations. They confronted him, and you know what he said to them? In their face, that there's no evidence of that, when Americans had all kind of evidence. So he's willing, he's a sociopath, and he's willing to go all the way.
On that point, now that Mr. Bannon has left the White House to spend more time with arcane Italian fascist philosophers, I'm sure, you have hardened military veterans, including veterans from the Iraq War.
White House? You mean as
the NSC,
yeah.
rather, sorry. Including people who are proteges of David Petraeus, were working in the Defense Intelligence Agency, mapping the insurgency from the very beginning.
You're saying the adults are in the room now?
Yes, and also the adults who know what Assad was up to for the first decade of the 2000s, when he was running these rat lines of jihadis, of AQI insurgents into Iraq to blow up American soldiers. There was a raid conducted by JSOC in 2008 in Deir Zur, and it got a guy called Abu Ghadia. He was known as the border emir, who was facilitating al-Qaeda's flow of jihadis into Syria. He was domiciled in eastern Syria by Assad's Mukhabarat. JSOC came in, they snuffed him, The evidence was then presented to Assad. I think it was David Miliband, then British Foreign Secretary, went to Damascus and said, look, we want you to stop doing this. We want you to seal your border. His response was, this guy wasn't here. And how dare you come in here and kill this guy on my soil?
Yeah.
I mean,
let me tell you, we've been doing that.
Yeah.
When I was in Iraq back in 2003, in the spring of 2003, after Baghdad fell, we immediately saw and we anticipated that the rat lines would begin to get activated. And they were. And we conducted a number of strikes along the border, on the Iraq side of the Syrian border, very, very successfully. So we've seen this. My point, reinforcing what you've said, adults are in the room, but adults have been in the room consistently. This is not a cold start for those that are in charge of the apparatus of wielding military and other elements of power against our enemies.
Yeah. But the big question is, does this change Moscow's calculus? The big question is what happens on Wednesday when Rex Tillerson goes to Moscow. Will Putin, and Lavrov lean on Assad to scale it back? And, that's maybe the one positive thing that might come out of this, but who knows? I think Assad will continue with barrel bombs and everything else.
Sadly, this is what I think we are underestimating. I think Assad is playing the final game of his life. He understands that there's no way he can go from here, meaning he will have to die.
So it's going to get worse.
So it's going, absolutely. He's fighting till the end. The reality that his own regime that was willing to negotiate 8 months ago, a year ago, and eventually to concede and open up for some kind of partition, they are not willing to do this anymore.
He will not listen to Moscow? At this point, he doesn't.
He will not listen to Moscow because,
will he listen
remember,
to the
there's
US?
Iranians.
No,
not at all.
Iranians at all. So the Iranians are backing him. The militia of Hezbollah is backing him, and now even his own people who start abandoning him are back in the pack.
Hold on 1 second. Is this why you say this is not a one-off?
It is not a one-off. This has to be resolved during this administration's period in office. I think that's the time horizon we're talking about. So to your absolutely spot on point, if he is fighting for his survival, what you're positing is it's going to get incredibly worse before it starts to scale away. So let's very cynically and Machiavellianly look at this thing and say, maybe that's okay. If he's going to self-destruct, there's a high cost to pay.
We might find a million people dead in the streets.
There's a high cost to pay, but what I'm saying is the calculation is human suffering by itself is insufficient. Human suffering that drives us to national security considerations drives a strategy.
Sir, I've been in the borders. I understand the human suffering. Look,
we've all seen it.
I understand. However, I am sure. I'm not assuming. However, the implication, the consequences of having 500,000 or 600,000 people dead, millions of people spread all around, the consequence of that we're radicalizing an entire generation of Syrians, of Middle Easterners, especially Sunni, who are looking at Americans, who are being silent and looking at this. They've been asking the world, basically, to save them. Please do something. Guess what? We're gifting them to ISIS and to the jihadists.
And as Tony Blinken just said, you got 10 years and you can exhaust yourself. I mean, you look at the calculus over the course of.
What are you guys reporting on this? What do you?
Well, there's Syrian media is reporting that there's only 3 soldiers killed on the air base. They were all Syrian soldiers, and there were no Russian casualties. These are from journalists inside Syria, quoting the local governor. The Syrian opposition is praising this strike, but this is the question. The opposition will, I think, be encouraged by this, but they don't have the military force to topple Assad. Right. Assad has essentially won this war. Yeah. So it doesn't change. You're not going to topple Assad. It doesn't change.
Well,
however, they're willing to.
He's won the war unless and until the United States says right. The program that we had, the CIA program to train and vet and arm FSA groups that were committed to fighting Assad, not exclusively signed on the dotted line to fighting only ISIS, that could be revivified, that could be amplified, and we could recruit more people to do that. This is a very weak regime, and this is the thing. The Russians understand, look, there is no such thing as the Assad regime anymore. This is an Iranian-controlled suzerainty. I talked to an FSB officer, very cynical, thinks in the sort of Middle Eastern fashion. He said, without Hezbollah, our bacon is cooked, right? I mean, Hezbollah in Iran, the IRGC, the Quds force of Iran, are undergirding and underwriting Russia's military installation and presence in Syria. That makes Moscow completely inextricably wedded to Tehran, which made the original Trump strategy of let's try and split that alliance and bring Putin into our camp almost impossible. Putin cannot afford to get rid of Iran without getting rid of Assad, and he can't get rid of Assad because to him that would be the ultimate capitulation to Western resolve. It would be a sign of weakness. And look, There is no love lost between Assad and Putin. If Putin had his druthers, Bashar al-Assad, his older brother, would be in charge. He wanted Michael Corleone, he got Fredo. He wanted this thing cleaned up years ago. He doesn't want to be there doing this. He doesn't want to be at the UN concocting conspiracy theories about the use of sarin gas. He's hopping mad, but his hands are also tied.
As I was talking to Christiane Amanpour, you had a reaction. We were talking about America's military might. The Russians can't stand up against it. Syria can't stand up against it. But we're war weary. We're still remembering the wars that we just got out of. Are we willing to go back there, even though we have the strongest military might in the world to deal with this?
That's a question that we routinely have to pulse. The issue that we have, or at least what the United States does and our allies do, frankly, quite well, is we self-regulate. We do subscribe to rules. There are laws of land combat, of how those domains of war and how we engage in those domains of war have rules, and we abide by those rules.
But
does it get nasty? Yeah, it gets nasty.
To win these conflicts, you have to put soldiers on the ground and have them die. Hezbollah and Iran are willing
to do this, but
that.
nobody else is willing.
We are not.
All right.
I would
The
be
truth
surprised
is-
if
Everybody stand by.
Trump would.
Stand by. Stand by. When we come right back, the latest on our breaking news, President Trump orders a missile strike on Syria.